Coaches, welcome back to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Gromer. And on this podcast, we bring you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sport that will give you practical ideas and strategies that you can use in your coaching to develop high-performing teams and high-character people. To learn more about how we serve coaches or to get the free podcast notes from this episode or any episode of the podcast, go to cuttingedgecoach.com or click the link in the show details. Coaches, I'm really excited to be joined this week by Kip Ioane, the founder of Teams of Men. Kip, welcome to the podcast.
Man, I'm happy to be here, Luke. Thank you for making space for me.
Absolutely. Kip, I'd love it if we just started off the conversation and if you would share with the audience about your coaching background, what led to you starting Teams of Men, and what it actually is, what it does.
Yes, sir. Well, I appreciate it. And I think my wife would say, "Hey, man, you tend to go long on your story, so I'm going to give you the concise version as we go." But no, I've been a college basketball coach. I was for 22 years. 14 of those as the head men's basketball coach at Willamette University. Transition. I was let go in April, which happens right in our business. But so many fond memories of 22 years of collegiate basketball coaching and interacting with young men age 18 to 23, and trying to really implement what I set out to do, how I was raised, because I think in a lot of ways, my parents as educators, my dad was a lifelong coach, high school and college. My mom was a Montessori school principal for 30 years. So I was raised in a house where, hey, education and sports are one and the same. The sports you play, the sports you coach is the classroom, is a platform to creating great people. And really, Teams of Men is kind of the genesis and the awakening of me realizing about 4 years into my head coaching time at Willamette, that I was failing to live up to that model. I was failing to live my own truth. I remember vividly, there was a couple of incidents, unfortunately, of sexual assault, men committing harm on our campus around 2012, 2013. There was a high-profile incident of domestic violence in the Salem area that was in the newspapers, right? Newspapers back in the day that people actually still read. And there was a Facebook group on Earth, a private Facebook group that a fraternity on our campus had that had a bunch of misogynistic, horrendous language towards female athletes on campus, female administrators, female professors on campus. And it all coalesced in like a 4-month span. And all I could do, and I'd been at that point, I played at Willamette. I was there for 4 years as a player. I was an assistant for 8 years. I was in my 3rd or 4th year as the head coach. I was Mr. Bearcat, right? And alumni would call me and say, "Kip, what in the heavens is going on at Willamette?" And my only answer in that moment, whenever I got those calls or those emails, was, "Well, it's not my guys. Hey, my guys didn't do it. It's not my guys in the headlines." But I knew deep down I was really having a hard time sleeping because I knew deep down I had done nothing in my program as the coach with, I'm in charge of the direction of the lives of these young men. I had done nothing different that promoted my guys making healthier decisions than some of these other coaches whose players had made poor decisions. I had done nothing different. I had just really got the luck of the draw, or thank goodness they had role models growing up that had taught them right from wrong. I had done nothing that I promised their parents to do in those living rooms on their phone calls where I had said, "Hey, if you send him to Willamette and Bearcat Hoop, you'll get the best man back possible. I will grow your son into a man." I'd done none of that. At the very best, I had been, stuck in scoreboard curriculum, which was, hey, we win, stay humble. If we lose, let's be resilient. Move on, practice, film, rinse, repeat, weights, and the usual. And not that those things aren't important, but I had lost kind of my way. And that's when I made the decision I have to change. And I went across campus to, at the time, the Gender Resource Advocate Center's coordinator's name was Carly Roner. She's actually a really good friend of mine now. She's on the Oregon Attorney General Sexual Assault Task Force, which I'm a member of the Men's Engagement Committee for. But I said, "Carly, I want my players to never do these things that have happened. Help me." And from that point on, it really started a journey of learning, okay, here's some prevention up front. A lot of the don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, which I started like, hey, I'm going to scare the hell out of my guys in these meetings about the facts around sexual assaults on campus. I'm just going to be like, hey, it's facts, analytics, don't do this, don't do this. But as I spent more time with Carly and more experts and a lot of women whose shoulders I still stand on to this day with the work they've been doing in their careers, I recognized a lot of these behaviors are the results of belief systems we carry as men. And I knew I was one of them. I'm from a Polynesian American Samoan family where family is very important, but it's also very patriarchal. And I could recognize even within myself, hey, some of these things I believed I had to do to be sort of certified as a man are leading to some of these behaviors that some of these men are committing, these horrific acts. And that really exploded into a 4-year program that I ran for 10 years at Willamette called Teams of Men, where we really dove into the who and what makes you the man you are today. And let's make sure we're a man of vulnerability, compassion, emotional fluency, range, all these things that aren't stereotypically associated with masculinity. And in doing so, will prevent our guys. We'll be proactive, and we won't just have guys that don't do things. We'll have guys that step up and help change the world. And that's the genesis of Teams of Men. And when COVID hit and we had, like everybody, we had a break, I started it as a business because I had been doing it for so long myself. We have been able to present at the NCAA Inclusion and Diversity Forum. We'd sent our players to other coaches, and they'd always come back like, hey, how do we get this going with my guys? I love it. So I started this as a consulting business. How can I help colleges and high school teams of men across the country? And that's where we are today. We're full time in it, helping everybody from high school freshman teams all the way through college. We've had whole athletic departments with us, where we're really trying to help coaches stand in that power of, hey, my guys look to me as a trusted role model, as a catalyst of change. What if I incorporated all the powers I have as a coach into helping them become great human beings, along with 1,000-yard rushers, 1,000-point scorers, no-hit throwing baseball players, whatever that may be. And so that's really the origin story in a condensed version of how I'm here today, right, as a business founder and facilitator of these types of, reimagining manhood discussions.
That's awesome. Thanks for your honesty and the story there, Kip. I respect that you were willing to, look in the mirror at that point and realize, I'm not actually doing what I've been telling people I'm going to do for their sons, with their sons. It's not what I actually want to be. Yeah, it's uncomfortable to come to those realizations,
Right.
but props to you for making the changes, and what an amazing journey it's taken you on from that point, right? I think we all
Appreciate
have those moments of insight where things really change because of that, and sometimes it takes some really hard situations like your university went through, and
Right.
you were close to spark action like that. And later, I think we'll come back to maybe some of the practical things that you did and do in that 4-year program that you ran. But I want you to talk next about you mentioned to me before the podcast a couple recent research studies that validate that young men in sports programs actually want and need this kind of connection with coaches and this kind of development in their sport experience. Will you talk about those?
Yes, sir. And I appreciate the prompt for that, because I think it plays into it. I know you've had a lot of great guests mention player-led programs, meet them where they are. And I think these studies are not just proof of, hey, Teams of Men in our framework and our belief system is needed, but also desired by young men. So let's start with the It's On Us, a great organization, national organization, that did a study of about just under 1,000 young men, college age athletes. They went across. Kyle Richard, if you know his story, was a D3 linebacker that actually stepped in a bystander intervention moment, kind of the extreme version where he stepped in and prevented a sexual assault and took a bullet, got shot by the perpetrator. But Kyle and It's On Us and a team went around and surveyed young men across the country. And the findings came back, which were uplifting and also like call to action. Young men across the country, male athletes, want to be part of the solution to preventing sexual assault. The overwhelming numbers were, hey, listen, I know my sport, my persona as a strong athletic man has been framed in such a way as I'm likely to be a perpetrator. I want to flip that. I don't want to be framed as a perpetrator. I want to be flipped and framed as someone willing to take the steps to make sure this doesn't happen to women, bullying doesn't happen to young men, hazing doesn't happen. Help engage me. The study came back and said, listen, we know people have busted their rear ends for decades to try to do prevention work, but the current models, the one-offs, like, hey, let's do one talk or let's bring in one expert and then they leave and we never bring it up again, don't work. They don't engage me. I don't feel any need to carry forward. I don't feel any trust or ability to be vulnerable in one-off speaker moments. No matter who the speaker is, how good they are. I want to do this often. And it came back and said, I trust my team. I trust my coaches to be kind of the avenue and the spaces where this happens. And so I thought that was it was probably 2 months ago that that study was released, in showing the need for this type of work. The second one is probably, and I know scare tactics aren't the most effective way to change minds, but they might open eyes to listen more. And this is from Equimundo, a great company that did a national 2 3 years of data. And those numbers came back in a terrifying kind of picture of where our young people, young men are at. Age 11 to 19, I believe, is the age range. And an overwhelming majority, 65%, 72% on various questions. I don't feel seen. I feel invisible. I don't think I have a natural connection, either friend, parent, coach. I don't have someone to go to when I feel stress, when I feel angst, when I feel depression, when I feel questions. I don't feel, in this survey, they said, I don't have someone. And that terrified me. I've got a 16-year-old at home, 16-year-old son at home. And I literally asked him the day I read this study, I said, bro, if you felt sad, if you felt down, you got somebody to go to? He was like, no. What? No. I was like, huh? Your boys aren't on that? And he was like, no, we don't really talk about stuff like that. I said, what about me, man? He was like, nah, I think you'd be disappointed. I said, and I didn't want to like come at him in a way that was like demeaning him, because he was being honest. He was giving me truth. I had to wear that as, oh my God. Like, I do this for a living, Luke. I literally go around and tell coaches how to connect with their young men. And my own 16-year-old was going to feel inadequate if he shared with me what he felt shortcomings in. And so, I had to go to work, but it also was like invigorating and like, man, this is what I should be doing. This type of stuff is what, and I think coaches are the solution, because in so many of these instances where young men are yelling, I need authentic connection. I need somebody I can trust. I need a role model. So many coaches exist in that space for their young men already. I think it's a matter of me and everyone else encouraging coaches to stand in your power, embrace that role. You are a catalyst of change, and that's an awesome thing. It just don't limit your catalyst of change to, what he does now. He closes out better now. You know what he does now? He boxes out more often. That's great, awesome. You need that for 20 minutes or 40 minutes, however much he's playing. But you know what he really needs is your shoulder. He really needs your ears to listen. He really needs you to show him and his teammate in the stall next to him how to actually be brothers. We say that so often. I know I did. I know every coach in America is like, we create a family. Well, just saying family and actually being a family are two different things. And I think that's what I'm so excited about. And I think those studies painted is, our young men want this. Oh my God, do they need it?
Yeah, that's powerful. I Yeah, it's one. The studies are, like you said, uh, a mixture of like, it's saddening but also a prompt to action.
Yes.
Um,
One of those, like, where we
Especially,
wouldn't know what to do if they didn't come out, right? We would still
yeah,
continue to put our ostrich like head in
yeah,
the sand and go about our day. Well, this is like, can't do it anymore. We know the facts. Got to change how we're doing. And I think change is the wrong word, because I know coaches, I don't want to paint coaches with this broad, evil, malicious brush, because there's so many great coaches that give a damn about their guys. We just got to dedicate more intentional time to this, right? That the game itself is not enough, no matter what the sport is. Basketball inherently itself is not enough without the coach, without the staff, without the framing of moments and times that grow them as people. And that's what that's kind of what I think my mission is, and what excites me, right? And probably what I'm much more qualified to do than tell coaches how to guard ball screens. I don't know if we ever figured that out, right?
yeah. It's fair. Uh, yeah, and when you talked about the "It's on Us" study and the fact that they reported that, yeah, the current model of just a little seminar, bring in one speaker one time, it doesn't really work. But the people we do trust, our coaches and our teammates, like, that didn't surprise me at all. Actually, I'm running a summer basketball camp locally, where I live this summer, and last night I was sitting down with former players that I've coached that are going to work it with me, and either like older high school students or a couple early on in college. And I was just talking with them. I said, okay, this is going to be different for you guys, because now you're taking off the player hat and you're putting a coach hat on. And I just tried to emphasize to them, and I'm going to continue to, of like, hey, this is a big deal
Yep.
now. just because these little kids are going to call you coach, like they're going to think you're awesome and
Yes.
you're going to have a lot of power this week. And I said, they're little Johnny. The highlight of his week may be when you come over and you encourage him individually and tell them that you noticed him getting better at something. Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I said too, when little Jimmy is bugging you to no end all week, right? The highlight of his week may be that moment that you connected with him and didn't give up on him as well, right? And so just yeah, I wanted them to understand that even in a different context of just a week of camp with young kids. But and I say that just to say, yeah, there's just so much power when you're the person with the whistle and the title of coach. Like one of the first interviews I did a few years ago was with Dr. Jeff Duke of 3D Coaching, the coach education branch of FCA. And yeah, he just talked about, I think he called it the attribution effect, or essentially that, we put coaches in this really, really high place on this pedestal because they're the gatekeeper of the sport that, and sports are so valued, probably
Yes.
definitely overvalued. But,
Yeah.
right, if we really want to use it for good, if we really want to make an impact, transform lives, help lead change, then yeah, I feel like I could make a strong argument that there probably isn't a better position to be in, as far as if you want to influence people than being called coach. And so, yeah, like it's those studies are sad, but also exciting in that, yeah, if you're a coach that wants to help lead change, you're in the right spot to do it.
Yeah. When you were telling your story about your guys working camp, it made me think of
Yeah.
two things. One, you're so right about platforms because coaches have these, and our players, when we make help them recognize, yo, it don't matter that you're not Damian Lillard. If you walk into an elementary school or I send you to a camp and you have a swoosh or an Under Armour on your tank top, this little kid thinks you probably are Dame's backcourt mate. And now you have a platform with him for however amount of time. And it takes about 2 seconds to destroy self confidence, belief, and it takes a lot of intentional work to build it. So, what are you prepared to do? And that was one of the things that I really tried to hone in on. And I think Teams of Men can help coaches do is your young men are going to get a platform, whether they're a Division I football player or all the way through a D3 tennis player. At some point, they're going to stand on a figurative platform and have a chance to create or destroy. And I think if you take on this work in the intentionality that we help you and you're capable of, you're going to send him up there to change the world. And because I'm just somebody that doesn't believe we can change the world one person at a time. I think it's too damn slow. But I do think we can change it, like you mentioned, one influencer at a time. So if that's a coach first, then he's creating 15 basketball influencers that are going to go out there and spread, whether that's in a speech, whether that's on social media, whether that's just in a word they say at the right time. I mean, imagine at your camp the power of one of your players telling a group of kids, "Hey, we don't say don't throw like a girl. We don't say that. That's not acceptable." That's going to change something in that little kid before it gets ingrained in him, and then he's 27, furthering these toxic tropes. So I couldn't co-sign more the platform and the power of potential that we have.
Yeah, that's good. And like I said, we're going to get into some more of the practical things of, how can you start to do this on your own. But before we get there, I'm sure that you've experienced it or hear it. I think many coaches would have reservations about, I'm not equipped to have these conversations, lead this thing, to whatever it is, right?
Yeah,
The reservations that they have. And then also like, I don't think my players would like this. Now, the research studies like they do want it,
yeah,
but how would you help a coach through that? That's like, I don't feel like this is in my
right,
wheelhouse.
right. No, and it's something that I think I had to take on as well and recognize this is an absolute pain point for coaches and a worry because we're so used to when we do stand up so figuratively in front of our guys, whether it's on the practice field, whether it's in the film room, whether it's in a meeting in our office, we're the expert, right? Like we've done the work, we've done the film breakdown, we've done the study, we're prepared to answer and tell questions and feel 100% confident in it. But that also puts us in this separate space from them. We're almost losing some of our humanity when we only show up in their life as experts. And the reason I bring that up is some of this work, you're 100% right. Coaches out there listening, you are going to say something dumb. I did. I still do. You are going to have to be vulnerable. But in doing and being vulnerable, you're actually going to increase your connection with your guys because you're actually going to turn into a human being. And I say that knowing full well there has to be a specific delineation between player coach relationship. But we always talk about authentic connection. We always talk about, you see successful teams. I have a great feeling with my guys. I trust my guys. When you stand up in front of them and say, guys, I want to talk today about something I did wrong as a dad. I want to talk today about something that I think I messed up as a husband. Suddenly you're giving them permission less than in the moment, which is great. It never happens. We always show up perfect, dialed in, prepared. And then they're like, oh my God, if I'm not perfect, I'm just going to be quiet and not say a damn thing because I'm so afraid of failure. But we're telling them, embrace it, because if we fail quickly, we'll learn and grow. But if we just sit on it and deny and pretend that we're all without any inadequacies, we're never going to grow. So I think number one, to answer your questions, coaches, it's 100% okay, and you will feel sometimes over your head. You will feel inadequate. But listen, you've lived your entire life. Coaches that are male sports, you've probably lived your entire life as a man. You've got so many lived experiences to share that all don't have to end with that. Don't have to have a happy ending. Sometimes some of your most powerful connection points will be your story of coming up short to your young men. And if they can learn from you and avoid it, great. Or if they can connect to you with like, oh man, coach is like actually a real person. There's a kip there too. It's not just coach. There's some of that. So I think that was huge. The second way I would answer that, especially on the topics that give us pause, because, hey, is this somewhere I should be in terms of, if we're talking about sexual assault, domestic violence, if we're talking about victim advocacy, healthy relationships, I promise you, there are experts that you can call upon that are so willing and ready to get access to you and your team because they know the power we just talked about. Whether you're on a college campus, a high school campus, there's counselors, there's community resources. There's literally a Google search away in some of the work that we do in connecting, because nothing would ever stop me when I was trying to figure out Linfield zone. Nothing would stop me from reaching out to other coaches, to YouTube, to the NBA, to Synergy, and figuring out and finding who's doing this better than me. How do I steal and adapt and apply it? This work is the same. There's just as many experts and career folks that have done this for so long, but have never had access to your team room that would love to help you. And that's what I encourage coaches. A lot of this, you do not have to give a PowerPoint. All you have to do is create the time and the space to bring it up, and you've done the work.
Yeah, that's good. And I think one of the things that resonated with me a lot as you were talking is just the willingness to share our own stories, and that those can be powerful points of connection. Uh, this last year and this summer, uh, I have a couple young men on my team that are very skilled, and they're also very emotionally volatile. Uh, a lot of coaches would call them mentally weak, right? Whatever you want
Right,
to call it, right? They get
right.
shook really quickly,
Yeah,
and they're really skilled.
yeah.
They're really good basketball players, but they are not very mentally tough yet, and they've grown a lot.
Hmm.
They're twins too. They've grown a lot. It's like one's hot and one's cold at the end
Yeah,
of the day. It's hilarious,
yeah.
but they, after one of our summer games, I think it was last month, one of them was really frustrated about something. Usually it's a lack of a foul call, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then it just shakes everything. And at one point I'd have to take him out of the game because he's no longer at a good performance state, right? He's gonna
Yeah,
hurt our team.
right.
So I'd take him out, have to get his, hey, you've got to come back to a good space and a good level here before I can put you back in this game.
Hmm.
And there's been like 1,000 interactions similar to that where like I could be very clear and honest with them at this point. But so game finishes, goes on. After the game, he's sitting down, still kind of in his feelings. I just went over next to him and sat down by him and said, hey, can I tell you a story? He's like, yeah, sure. And I just told him the story about how when I was in high school playing JV basketball, it was our last JV game of the season. We were 13-0, and we really wanted to go undefeated in our little JV season, right? Because that's one for the record books that everybody will remember. And so we were down. I think we were down. It was either 3 or 5. Like, it was still a game, and I think there's probably 30 or 45 seconds left. So we're down. The other team inbounds the basketball, and we have to foul. So I go in to foul them, to put them at the free throw line, shoot free throws. And when I do that, the ref calls an intentional foul on me. Like, and to this day, still have no idea why. Like, I was literally trying to foul him to shoot free throws. Like, I've never seen a ref do it since.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't malicious. It wasn't
Right.
dirty. I was just trying to either get a steal or put him at the line. And this ref calls an intentional foul. And I see that this has happened, and I know what that means. And I turn around. I don't think I said anything. I didn't use any cuss words. I might have just said, like, "Are you kidding?" I turned around and I just threw my fist in the air. I was like, "What?" Like,
Yeah.
I was just so frustrated. And then the other ref teased me up. So they now have 4
Yep.
free throws
Game
and
over.
the ball. The game's over. I'm on the bench in tears, right? Because I'm like, I just cost my team a chance to win this game.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just told them the story. And I said, hey, like, I tell you the story because I don't want you to be in that situation. Like, I felt terrible. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want you to feel like that. And when you lose control of your emotions, it's going to lead to something like that. And trust me, you don't want to have to deal with the feelings after a game like that, where I lost my cool and now I feel like I cost my team a chance to win the game. And he didn't have a ton to say about it in the
Right.
moment. I wasn't looking for something,
Right.
but I just wanted him to know, one, I get it. I know what it's like to lose your cool. And then two, like, hey, like, the reason I am hard on you about this, or that we talk about this, is because it matters, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
want you to do the same things that I've
Right.
done, right? And so,
Right.
yeah, that's one of the things that resonated with me when you were talking about that, is we just need to be willing to, and usually just telling them our story, like,
Yeah.
where'd you screw up, and like you said too, there's a boundary. There's not, we shouldn't share everything, but there
Right.
are lots of things that we can share in an appropriate way, and I think it resonates with our athletes. Yeah, and I think even as you're working with older ages of
Mm-hmm.
athletes, they can tell you, like, he's still, what, 14, this athlete I
Right.
shared it with, 13, 14. So he doesn't know how to articulate to me even
No.
a lot. But some point down the road, I think he'll probably, he'll remember that, hopefully, right? But those older athletes too, they can probably articulate back to you, like, oh,
Yeah.
coach, thanks. Like, that
Well, I
makes
think
sense.
what you're
So,
hitting on
yeah.
there is so, and I say this, and I know old school coaches is the wrong term. Just narrowly focused sometimes. That whole story you just described is emotional fluency, right? Which is something as men we're taught is not something in our wheelhouse, or for some reason, well, men are inherently bad at emotions. No, we just don't discuss them. And like you modeled, I love the idea where you say, I sat down next to him. It's so powerful. And there's so much research about shoulder to shoulder, front seat, driver's side seat, passenger seat are so much easier conversations than come into my office, sit across from my desk, and let me interrogate you. And then I wonder why we don't have an authentic story time. And then, as you were mentioning, the twins with the emotions, Dr. Susan David. Once again, like as we go through and we talk basketball, we end up saying all these people that have like been drivers of great schemes and ideas that people talk about. Susan David's an emotional fluency dynamo expert, and she talks about name it to tame it. And so many times I would accuse my players, like, hey man, you're frustrated. Hey man, you're pissed, rather than a simple language change for coaches out there. Hey man, you are feeling anger. Hey man, you are experiencing frustration. Because if you name it, you tame it. Instead of the emotion now becoming you, it's a thing you're experiencing, which means you can control it later on. It's a whole process. But even those little tweaks, that little session you did was an emotional fluency lesson, right? That coaches would be like, I could never do emotional fluency. You just did it. I shared a story of when the emotion I felt overtook me, the consequences, done. Teams of men, right? And we move. I think sometimes they get it in their head that they're going to have to get a doctorate in all these things that as a man they're probably not good at. No, it's a matter of making sure you have some nomenclature, some vocabulary. Make it yours. Who are you, the coach, And how do you usually disseminate information to your guys? Just make sure the next delivery is about something like this.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned it earlier with your own story, but I think it's worth noting again here or reemphasizing too. Yeah, I think one of the keys in doing this kind of work and just making a transformational impact is understanding your own story and your own journey. And particularly for us as male coaches working with male athletes, like, you got to understand your journey of manhood, what you grew up believing about what it meant to be a man. 'Cause that's pretty loaded, and if you
Yeah,
aren't honest about that or introspective, reflective, don't understand your own journey and story, it's going to be hard for you to help these young men navigate theirs. There was I can't remember, maybe it was in Joe Ehrmann's book Inside Out Coaching or
hmm
something else I read or listened to, just talking about that. It's actually crazy that one of the biggest predictors of positive outcomes for children is parents' ability to articulate their own story and
wow,
journey,
wow.
right?
I think that was
Like,
in Joe's book. I think you're right. I think that
yeah,
is in Joe's book.
it's either in that book or it's in a book called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. I can't, yeah, I maybe both, honestly. But that one that has always stuck with me, and I think the same could be said for us as coaches, right? Because of that relationship we have with our players. But like, if I want these positive outcomes for my two young boys that I have, I really have to know myself, know my story, know my journey to be able to help them on theirs. And again, so much of that is just sharing
Yeah,
your journey with them. Is
yeah.
that, I mean, we all need a guide, like someone
Yes.
that's been there and done it before.
Well, there's so much I tell coaches now in when in the beginning rounds of getting to know what we do, how we can help. I said, Coach, I am not coming in there, and I don't expect you to tell your guys to become clones of you. Our wives would laugh hysterically. Like, well, we don't have to reach. There's enough. There's just one Kip. We don't need much more of you. But the mirror training, like you mentioned, the self reflection tool. If a person plays for you, and the thing they take, they don't ever get better at any of the skills on the floor of the field, but they take from you the ability to pull out a mirror and go, why about me the rest of their life, I think you did a hell of a job. I think you created a curious individual with some humility whose wives, whose kids, whose employers, whose friends will thank you for the fact that, you know what, that person is not static. That person is willing to reflect. And that when you were talking, it made me think I'm a better, so much of this people talk about, hey, Kip, you did, thank you for helping my son XYZ. And really, oftentimes, their son taught me just as much as I learned because I had to look at me in him. And so I don't think I'd be half the father, half the husband. Not that I am by any means perfect at any of that, but I know I'm better than I would have been having not coached this way. Because if I ask my players, if I have these lessons and stuff, and I'm working, oh, that's a great teams I'm in for my team tomorrow, post practice, pre film. Man, some of those definitely come home. My daughter will tell you, "Oh, Dad's got another lecture." Yeah, but it's helping me think and frame things that I probably never would have done. There's only so much application of tomorrow's plan against Whitman for my son and daughter at the dinner table. There's a ton of application. If we talked about current events, victim advocacy, pornography, there's a ton of application and takeover when they say, "Dad, what happened in practice today?" So I think those for coaches listening, there's a better version of you at the end of this journey as well, which I think we're all trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's really good. Well, let's dive into maybe some more practical things here. If a coach wants to start this journey, maybe they're coaching high school boys, college
Hmm.
boys, and maybe they don't have the budget to bring someone in to help them
Right.
do this. They got to do it on their own. And maybe you can even share like
Yeah.
where you started with this, but where do we start? What kind of conversations should we be having? What kind of resource should we be using? You mentioned like accessing people in your community. I think
Yeah.
that's a lot of wisdom there. Find people in your community. There's other people that want to help, but where would you start, or where would you
Yeah.
tell this coach to start?
Well, I think there's two fronts here. There's some learning to do, and you mentioned Joe Ehrman, one of the best books, Inside Out Coaching. There's Jackson Katz, The Macho Paradox. There's Peggy Orenstein, Boys and Sex. There's so much literature. There's so much of it. You could go there to feel more comfortable. for yourself. Like, hey, and in doing so, take some of this journey of kind of thinking about yourself and manhood. But really, I think the power of a great question sometimes outweighs what an answer gives you, because sometimes even a good answer is an end point. So I think just sitting down with your staff, it's first, and saying, putting a statement on the board that you can question. Hey, the type of men we have in this program, we would want to show off to others. Then just start asking questions. What is a man? What do you mean show off? What would others? You can come up with so many different statements that take you down a pathway of exactly what you mentioned earlier, Luke. Who were the professors of manhood? Are we professors of manhood? And what are our players doing to prove they've learned various lessons? And I think that's a safe. I hate the word safe space, because I think safety can be used to tone police people that are passionate. So I prefer, hey, let's make sure our team rooms are brave spaces. Let's make sure our team rooms are courageous spaces. And I want to make sure everybody knows I stole that from Jen Fry. She's a phenomenal DEI coordinator for athletic departments across the country, and she will scream at me when I use that and don't give her credit. But I think the brave space starts with, guys, let's start baseline male role model in your life you love to death and give us a great lesson he taught you. And then you're going to allow them to start in strength, whether it's dad, big brother, grandpa, cousins, a lot. I mean, recently in a team room, I had so many older cousins in just whatever this particular team. There were so many older cousins mentioned, which was a new one for me. And start there. What'd you learn? I learned my dad taught me respect. Okay, how do you prove respect? How do you show that you learned your dad's lessons? You start to get some behavior beliefs, and you start to get some strength before you dive into, hey, think of something that you used to believe in that you don't anymore. That's a hard jump space, right? Like, hey, coach, these are four men I love to death, and now you want me to think critically of them? We just started talking about this stuff yesterday. We don't start there. We build towards those type of conversations. I think those are probably the two places I would go. Reach out, get some of these books, get some of the notes, right? Like Luke does, some notes. Find a wheelhouse. Like, you know what? That resonates with me. That particular chapter. I know some of our early work was like chapter 7 of Macho Paradox. That resonates with me. Guys, we're going to read the first 2 pages, and then we're just going to share. No agenda. We're going to share. I think those are pretty common launch points. If you're in a college setting, you might be able to dive deeper into, hey, the reason we're doing this is here's all these stats about violence, gender violence in the communities we inhabit. We are not saying, gentlemen, that you are those people. We are saying you're the answer to reducing those numbers. And then you could launch from there with a little bit more mature audience. But I've even found some of the high school kids, they're reading about bullying. They're reading about hazing. They've been exposed to Andrew Tate online, right? So some of this is even starting to be necessary at 14, 15, which 10 years ago, I probably would have told you, wait a little bit. Now it's like, man, we got to get going now before it's already indoctrinated in them.
Yeah. I agree. I don't think that 14 or 15 is too early to have
Right.
some of these conversations in an age appropriate way. Yeah. Yeah. I'm even just thinking, about the young boys, future young men that I coach, and, that junior high age and that high school
Yes.
age, man, just the
Well, here's one for
the
you that
the
might be,
bullying that so
yes.
many students experience, right? And then not only that is the lack of awareness about the power of words,
Mm-hmm.
and not only words that might be sexist, racist, like you name
Yep.
it. um
And all those
many of them
isms
many
you're
of them are
mentioning.
just so unaware of it, and it it takes someone that they trust to say, hey, here's why this is not something you should say, or here's why this is unacceptable here, in a way that is like the heart of a teacher, not just a police officer.
Yes.
Too, Kip, before we
Yes.
started recording, you shared with me that you have I hope it's okay, you have a son on the spectrum,
Absolutely.
right?
Yep.
I've had to have several conversations with students in my classes about uh, autism spectrum
Yep.
disorder. And so there's been times where I've had to remove a student from class and say, hey, John, come talk to me for a second. And this is a non-disabled peer,
Yeah.
and just say, hey, do you know what autism is? Right? Maybe they said something to or about a student with autism. And most of them will say, no. I'm going to say, yeah. I was like, tell me what you know about it. And they don't really know anything. It's like, can I tell you a little bit about it? Just explain a little bit to
Yeah.
about, and I'll get to a point where it's like, right. The biggest aspect of it is it socially impairs these individuals. They have extreme difficulty learning and understanding
Hmm.
social cues, social norms. If it's a boy, I'll actually use the example of like a bathroom. Hey,
Mm.
like, did anybody teach you which urinal to use? And they're like, what? I'm like, for real, like, which urinal do you use if there's three? Like, do you go in the middle? And they're like, no. I'm like, okay, yeah, right. Students with autism, they'll go in the middle. They'll have no idea, right? Like they don't learn these things without
Yeah.
being taught them. Just and I share that just to say, like, that's one of the ways or areas I think it's important, maybe if you're at a younger age, that you start, is just having some conversations of, hey, do you even know what that means, what you
Hmm.
said? Or sometimes like the word retarded I find
Yeah.
extremely
Oh,
offensive.
yes.
um, and it's something that junior high students and people love to use.
Yep.
And at the beginning of the year in my class, one of my teams would say, hey, this is a word that's unacceptable here. We don't say it. I find it really offensive. Here's why. Here's why I ask you not to say it. And when it does get used, honestly, I can't think of a time on my teams where it's been used because I'm really clear on it. But
Yeah.
in my classrooms, there's been a few times where someone's used it. And I've just like, I mean, the
Yeah.
students be like, "Oh, whoa!" Like he's serious. I'm like, "Hey, that's we don't use it here,
Hmm.
right?"
Yeah.
I think that's a place that we can start at that younger age too. It
100%.
is giving an explanation, but even if they don't fully grasp that explanation, of just being like, "Hey, this isn't acceptable here."
Right. Right. And you brought up so many things that I think coaches can dive into. Even like you mentioned, hey, you know what, Kev, we're not in a position where teams of men can come into Ohio. Cool.
Yeah,
But if you talk about intent versus impact, just like you mentioned for young kids, hey, listen, I know you didn't have the intent of harm. The classic, I was just joking. That could be 100% true. But if you teach in your team rooms, intent doesn't equal impact and doesn't absolve you from accountability. That's a great lesson across so many of the isms you mentioned. I think some of this work that I've done, so many of the isms are related to one another. If I'm likely to believe in my superiority because of what's between my legs, I'm probably likely to believe in the color of my skin makes me superior as well, right? If I'm like that, and that could lead to more ableism, right? That could lead to all kinds of things. One of the things where I think coaches get caught up's the wrong word. There might be a blind spot, not intentional, but hey, we have a culture, right? How many times have you had great guests talk about establishing culture? But if you can't have culture without climate, and if your young man is experiencing harm in your culture, he can't perform to it. Your young man feels invisible in your culture or less than because if I am me, I will be bullied, mocked, said. Then you can't really fully participate in the culture if the climate makes you feel awful. So I think those are things that coaches can take on. The last one I would mention, especially as you talked about in the middle school classrooms, junior high, is courage in the moment, because the studies will show you, whether depending on the study, 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 will never commit some of these harms we're trying to prevent. Right? The majority of men are going to be great humans. The problem is that same majority often stays silent, tends to not see the one or two guys committing harm. So, in your friend circles, in your team room, are you training your young men to stand up in the moment they hear the R word, just like you modeled? Are you training your young men to stand up in the moment when someone's degrading a woman in your team room? And literally, you probably have kids in there that want to, but they don't know how. And all they need is, just like you would teach them, this is how we get through a screen. You teach them how to stand up in the moment. You give them a phrase, something as simple as, "Hey man, that's not us here. Hey man, we don't say that here," just like you did. "Hey man, that's not teams of men." You got to give them the phrase to help them stand in that courageousness in the moment, because that's what society needs in general. It's not this, "all men are inherently awful." It's not 9 out of 10 men committing harm. It's 9 out of 10 men ignoring the one that does. And we need guys to stand up for courage in those pivotal moments.
yeah, it's really good. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about kind of the example you shared there, because I think this is something that is far too common that coaches either are unaware of or unfortunately maybe ignore,
Yeah.
when the reality is they're their climate is one of bullying, or like the kids aren't connected to
Yep.
each other. They treat each other like trash,
Yep.
and kids don't feel safe there.
Yep.
And just the way that kids
For sure.
are treated is poor. And I'll give you another story. And I've reflected on it some. I don't know if I handled it perfectly, but I handled it in the moment the best I knew how to. We were getting ready to go to one of our games last season, and walked into the like locker room area. Long story short, we don't even have our own gym. Our school's being remodeled, but the place we were changing, bathrooms were in there. I walked in just to remind the kids we were about to leave, and when I walked in there, I saw one of my players like on top of one of our other players, messing with them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and these two kids are friends. Like,
Right.
I know they love each other. But like it was bullying, right? And
Yep.
it's a lot bigger kid messing with a lot smaller kid. And also I've shared on the podcast too, I experienced significant bullying as a kid, right? So like that pisses me off because I
Mm-hmm.
know what it's like to be the little kid. And so I walked in and saw this, and in no uncertain terms, like raised my voice, was like, get off of him now. If I ever see you do that again, I will leave you here and not take you to the game.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was
Mm-hmm.
like, I do not ever want to see that again. And honestly, reflecting back on it now, it's probably something I should have followed up with even more with both of them and then the whole team. And also, I probably should. Hey guys, I'm pretty disappointed that there were 12 others of you in
Yeah.
here and you
Yep.
watched this happen.
Yep.
And here's what you say next time
Yeah.
when someone wants to act a fool. So
Right.
yeah, I think that, and so I guess
Yeah.
that was a tangent, but my thought process here was, yeah, how do we as coaches maybe identify when those things are going wrong in our team, and then
Mm-hmm.
or prevent them from happening, intervene when they are?
Yep.
Like, how do we make sure
Great
we don't have a
question.
team that's infested with bullying and
Right.
toxic relationships that are going to not only
Yes.
sabotage your team, your impact, but your performance too?
Yes. No, you cannot possibly be a good team with that type of stuff happening, right? And we can't have a team. I think we can end up there if we don't take steps. We can end up with a team that's bonded over the pain of someone else, right? Whether that's in a joke, whether that's in the bullying, whether that's in the failure of a teammate in a position, a possession in the sidelines, bond over making fun of his shortcoming. One, I would say climate. Some of the best experts and discussions have been from Kyle Kavanaugh and Asima Rastogi on Essential Coaching Conversations. Some of my learning on climate versus culture. I think you hit it on the head. Even though it was a tangent, we know scientists research. Sometimes I feel like I should have studied sociology instead of business economics in college, right? Because everything is how people think and how they change their minds drive the entire world. But we know in order to change behaviors and belief systems, we got to move hearts before minds. Logic isn't the first mover. As much as we as coaches and mature people, we think logic should move, and then we forget he's 15. So we got to move hearts, and the quickest way to a heart is through stories. So I think what you just right there is a story, but also letting the kids share their stories in a brave way that protects them from repercussions until you've got the culture change. So let me give you an example. You could say in a team space, I'm going to use football just because football is constantly in meetings, right? I know other teams don't lose your minds. I know you do meetings as well. But football is literally in position groups with a big screen and a coach lecturing. You use something like Poll Everywhere, which is anonymous use of their phones. Please engage their phones. They get a text to the screen protected with anonymity, and you put on the screen, hey man, what is something in our team space right now that's bothering you? Hey man, what is an action being taken that we probably got to fix to be better as a team? You can even frame it that without using bullying. And you will get, the kids will text. They are used to disseminating deep thoughts via text. That's just how they talk. They're not less than me, I'm 44. Yeah, okay, we talked. Great. We didn't have cell phones. If I did, I would have texted it. But you will get real-time feedback. You could even do this without being in a team space. You could say, Sunday, guys, in 5 minutes, I'm sending the team a question. Here's the link. I need 52 answers. Don't put your name. I just need 52 answers. And suddenly you'll get from the players what they're concerned about. And I bet you a majority of the time it aligns with what you care about. And then I think you start planning from there. I think you start, like, I was at a school in California in June, and you know what I got back from a very diverse group of football players? I got back, "Coach, we say the N word too much." And I said, "What?" And they said, "Coach, it's not the hard R in the survey. It's not the hard R. It's the soft A." But we started discussions for the rest of those 2 days I was with them. Hey, black players in the room, what does this do to your feelings around here? Guys that are using this that aren't black, why do you feel like you can? Do you know the historical background of those words? And then I took it to the coaching staff and say, were you aware? And they didn't know. And that's not because they're idiots. That's not because they're bad. They just weren't attuned or didn't have the time to really dial into that being an indicator of climate and culture. And once we brought it up, I got to leave the room and I let them create language, right? I'm sure the R word, just like you mentioned, we had at Willamette when I was the coach, and there's no homophobic slurs or types of anything in here. Coach will lose his ish hearing that. And then, so I think you feed the feedback and start with the kids first. Cause I think the sessions, even in my work, I try to send surveys before, because you want to meet the kids where they are, especially in the beginning. You want to grab them with something that resonates with them, and you can eventually weave to your priorities. But I think we got to give them some credit. They probably identify and understand what you care about too. Coach, this ain't right. I feel like this ain't right. I need some help as the team leader, as the captain, as the
Yeah,
senior. Can you help me, coach? I'll fix this for you. I just don't know how. I don't have the tools right
that's good. What was the name of that app or
now.
software
Poll
you talked
everywhere.
about? Just
Poll
poll
everywhere.
everywhere. That's
And there's
good.
a free version, and then the paid for version.
Sure.
If football coaches, you might need it because there's so many players. But really, the free version, and also Luke, on that you can generate word clouds and content to live forever. If you ask your players, hey, how do we encourage each other? What are the phrases we use? You get a word cloud, you print it, put it on your walls. How many? I mean, we all put wall stuff up, right? And now
Yeah.
you're socially normalizing in your team space words. I think you're right on the nose. Words matter. That's a whole 3 day
Yeah.
workshop we do. Words do matter.
That's really good. Well, Kip, this has been fantastic. Before we wrap it up and hop out of here, I'm going to ask you 3 quick rapid fire questions, and I'll
Ready?
let you share with the audience where they can connect with you.
Yes.
The first one is this: the most fun part of coaching is.
Can I? I'm going to say this because I have recency bias, but I was at a wedding this past Saturday where the groom had 9 of his teammates from our program in the wedding party. And as much as I love winning, don't get me wrong, coaches out there, I loved winning. I didn't do enough of it. But that being able to sit back and just witness those young men 6 years out still be a family. I mean, I enjoyed my adult beverage that day, watching and seeing that. So I would say the delayed scoreboard to the people they become for a college coach.
That's awesome. The second one: I wish I would have known blank before my first coaching experience.
Holy cow. You know what? I wish I wouldn't have been in such a hurry to prove I was different from the. I followed up my head coach that I played for. He was a Hall of Fame coach, Gordy James, national championship, NAIA, amazing coach. And I got the chair right after he retired. But I was in such a hurry to prove that I wasn't him that I probably did stuff just to be different instead of stuff that fit my guys. Because that was basically still coach's team. We had 3 guys, I helped recruit, but that was coach's team. But I was so in a hurry to be, this is Kip. I'm not just Gordy's player. I'm Kip. Messed that up. I should have been more comfortable in my own skin and trusted that the old man knew what the hell he was doing. And I could have done some of his stuff, even though I don't know if I just didn't want to run flex, Luke. I didn't want to run flex.
Well, I wouldn't have done that either. Last one: I know I'm successful as a coach when.
This was proven to me in the lowest moment. Getting let go as a coach sucks. It happens a lot in our industry. It's a soul wound. But when my former players, over 14 years of players, none of them texted me about, Coach, hey, I heard what happened. Thanks for the points per game. Coach, hey, I'm sorry this happened to you. Thanks for teaching me the in and out step back. None of them texted me that. They all texted me the impact they felt as husbands now, as better brothers, better sons, better fathers, And that meant something to me. Don't get me wrong. I wish I could go back and give them all national titles for what they gave me in effort. God, I wish I could. But vindication in the approach we took, because those kids could articulate, number one, Luke, they could articulate to me a higher level of our relationship that they probably couldn't have done when they were 18. Right. And so that was indication to me that I had, despite my record, I'd done it the way I wanted to do, especially since, like what we talked about at the beginning, I purposely pivoted to, I got to impact these humans.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Kip. That's really good stuff. Before we hop off, Kip, share with the listeners where they can connect with you and learn more about the work that you're doing.
So I appreciate that. I think the number one resource is hit us on our website, teamsofmenllc.com. You can find out origin story, backstory, and the myriad of ways we help. Memberships, climate assessments, me in person. We have an interactive player guide now that we can ship out that helps you run meetings and your guys reflect. And then I don't know, maybe I should be a Threads person now, Luke, but Twitter's big for me. I think coaches, that's how I found you, right? I know we connected on Twitter, but Twitter at Kip Ioane and at teams_men. And if you're following us there, that'll get you to our TikTok, that'll get you to our YouTube, that'll get you to our newsletter, all those different ways. But that's kind of the main funnel with the webpage.
Awesome. Well, Kip, thanks for taking the time, and thanks for the work you're doing, man. It's important and it matters. And like you said, the more we can influence those influencers, the greater that impact will be. So keep up the good work, brother.
Thank you, sir.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode, and a huge thanks to Kip for joining me. If you'd like to connect with him, you can find links in the show details. And if you'd like to learn more about how we serve coaches, or get access to the free podcast notes, as well as a free transcript from this episode, just click the link in the show details or go to cuttingedgecoach.com. Thanks for listening to the podcast.